Next, I will be making an invisible zipper. So I begin by marking 1 centimeter seam allowance along both center back seam on the bodice as well as the skirt. And here I'm going to mark where the zipper stop is going to go. In case of my zipper, it's 1 centimeter below the neckline. And then I'm going to press the zipper teeth flat to make attaching the zipper a bit easier. So now I'm pinning the zipper to the bodice right sides together, and the zipper teeth should be facing away from the seam allowance. I'm using an adjustable zipper foot to help me get as close to the zipper teeth as possible. So I hold on to both the zipper and the fabric of the dress while I'm sewing. Here, because I'm making a mock-up, I didn't have the zipper that's appropriate length. That's why it doesn't go all the way to the zipper notch. You have to forgive me for that. But for yourself, your zipper should go down to the zipper notch. Once I get to the bottom of the zipper, I zip it up just to mark where the waistline seam lies, to make sure that when I'm sewing the other side of the zipper, the waistline will end up being at the same level on both sides of the zipper. And next I do the same thing on the other side of the zipper. Starting at the top, the zipper tape is right sides together with my bodice. The zipper teeth are facing outward, away from the seam allowance, and I try my best to sew as close to the zipper teeth as possible. And then just to check that everything is okay, I zip up the dress, make sure that I didn't catch anything I shouldn't have caught. Next, I start attaching the lining to the bodice at the neckline. So I pin the bodice lining to bodice right sides together, starting at the center back, aligning the shoulder seam, aligning the center front, and then I sew at 5mm seam allowance all around that neckline. Next, I'll understitch the collar. I'm stitching bodice lining to the seam allowance of the neckline as close to the edge of the bodice lining as I possibly can get. The understitching makes sure that the bodice lining will not flip out of the dress and won't be visible at any time when you're wearing the dress. Next, I'm going to attach the center back of the bodice lining to the bodice and the zipper tape. I'm starting at the top and go almost all the way down. I leave about 2 centimeters of the bodice lining free. And by the way, I'm not sewing too close to the zipper teeth. I want the lining to be a little bit away from the zipper teeth because I don't want the lining to get caught in the zipper teeth. Here you could see me folding that edge of the corner of the center back and neckline, folding it upon itself. I do not clip that corner because that folding that corner will make sure that you get a really crisp corner when you turn the lining to the right side. Next, I will be sewing bodice lining and the bodice at the arm side, which is a little bit tricky. Here you can see the wrong side of the underarm seam on the sleeve and the right side of the bodice lining. So this is how it's going to look like once you're done. So I hold onto the fabric as is. I put my hand underneath the lining, grab that seam, holding it together, then I flip the lining to the wrong side. And here you see the wrong side of the bodice as well as the wrong side of the bodice lining, and you can see that the side seam on both the bodice and bodice lining is aligned, and this is where I put my pin in. This is really important to get right, otherwise you might sew the lining to the bodice in some weird way, but if you do it this way, the raw seam of the arm side will be completely encased by the bodice. You can see me putting pins into the notches on the arm side just to help myself keep everything together in the right spots. So here I begin sewing, backstitch, and start sewing at that seam line that I did when attaching the sleeve to the bodice. This part, it is a bit tricky. You probably won't be able to go all around the armscye all at once. Here you can see me pulling out a little bit more fabric to get a little bit more of that armscye done. And after I pull out the fabric, I align notches again. Here I'm aligning the shoulder seam of the bodice lining and the bodice. So at this point, it usually gets a bit too hard for me. So I backstitch and I take the bodice and the bodice lining as they are, and I try to attack the same seam from the other side. It's a bit hard to explain it. So once I backstitched, I take a little bit more of the fabric out and kind of go at it from the other side. So here I backstitch where I left off, and you can see me going through the shoulder seam and getting to the point where I started. And this is how the armscye should look like once you're done. And again, I'm really sorry that I cannot explain it any better. And here I'm doing the version D, which has a piping cord attached to the armscye. So I changed to the adjustable zipper foot for that. And here again, I am visualizing for myself how this seam is going to look like once I'm done. I hold on to it and I flip the lining to the wrong side. Here I have the wrong side of the bodice, wrong side of the bodice lining at the side seams, and I put the pin in there. And again, I put pins into the notches of the armscye and start sewing. With the adjustable zipper foot, I try to sew as close to that piping cord as I possibly can. Again, you can see me getting to the point of the shoulder seam, which is usually the hardest to go over. I hold on to the shoulder seams to make sure they are aligned, but here you can see I'm pulling out the fabric, but it's a bit too hard at this stage. So I'm going to backstitch, and I have just flipped the bodice lining to the right side just to find that spot where I backstitched, and I put my hand underneath the bodice lining, grab it and pull it out again. And again, I align the shoulder seam and the rest of the fabric that's left for me to sew over. Find the spot where I finished sewing, backstitch into it, and finish sewing all around the armscye. So I usually take the armscye seam in 2 goes. I don't think I have ever done it all at once. So here I'm again flipping everything to the right side, and this is how your armscye is going to look in version D. Now I will attach the bodice lining to bodice at the waistline seam. So I take my hand through the opening in the side seam, find the waistline seam, and I put the right side of the bodice lining towards that waistline seam. So here I'm pinching together the side seam of the bodice lining, and you can see the side seam of the bodice at the wrong side and the wrong side of the bodice lining. And I align those side seams together and put a pin in there. And then I put my hand into that through that opening again and grab more of that waistline seam, and I use the dart again to orient myself on that long waistline seam. I align the darts together and put a pin in there, and then I grab a little bit more of that waistline seam because I'm going to try to go as close to the zipper as possible. I'm not going to sew to the zipper. I'm going to have a little bit of opening left. I can see the wrong side of my bodice, and I begin to sew the bodice lining to the bodice at the waistline seam at 1 centimeter seam allowance, making sure I don't sew over the previous seam which I made. That's the seam where we attach the skirt to the bodice. So if you need to leave like 1 millimeter away from that seam line to attach the bodice, it doesn't matter. As long as the raw edge of the bodice is inside and not on the outside, you're golden. So here I'm just pulling out a little bit more of that waistline seam, and I'm pulling all of that out through that opening that we have left in the bodice lining. This is why that seam line, that back stitching that you did on the side seam, it has to be really sturdy because it has to withstand this kind of handling. Now I've gotten to the darts on the bodice front, and again I'm aligning the darts on the bodice lining and bodice front, making sure they're facing the right direction, and then I'm sewing over them. Once I'm done sewing over them, I pull out a little bit more of the dress and sew over a little bit more of that waistline seam until I get to the other side of the dress. So here I am at the point of the back dart. This is the back dart both on the bodice and the lining. And I'm going to sew as close to that zipper as I possibly can and backstitch. And then I'm going to pull the dress to the right side through that side opening. And here you can see how the bodice lining is going to look at the end. So now with those tiny little corners that I left for myself, I just tuck in the raw edges of the bodice lining into the bodice and try to make as even 90-degree corner as I possibly can in that spot. So I fold on those seam allowances onto themselves and you should be left with that, 90-degree corner. And then I take this nicely folded corner and I top stitch it to the bodice of the dress. If you're using a matching thread, trust me, you won't be able to see it. But if you don't want to do any top stitching, you can slip stitch that corner of the bodice lining to the bodice and the zipper teeth. But I like doing that because I also top stitch. I haven't shown you this in the video, but I actually top stitch all around the waistline seam because I like the waistline seam to stay as flat as possible, and it actually does make a huge difference in how the dress turns out. I'm sorry I didn't show it to you, maybe in the next tutorial. And the only thing left to do is to hem your dress. And because it's a circle skirt, we are going to hem it in a very specific way. So I'm doing a double folded hem. I have marked 1 centimeter away from the bottom of the hem. And the most important thing here is to put the folded edge against the feet dogs. So you see the top of your skirt, the right side of your skirt, and the wrong side of your skirt is facing the feet dogs. Why? Because when you have a circle skirt and you do a double folded hem, you can often get kind of strange folds on the hem because you will have excess fabric underneath because of the curved edge of the circle. So what happens here, you do the folded hem and the feet dogs are taking care of the excess of the fabric. They ease in all that excess fabric evenly throughout your skirt. So once you press your skirt, you're not going to get any strange folds. So here you can see I'm just doing bit by bit. I haven't done any pressing ahead of time. It's so much faster than doing a double folded hem, pressing it at the ironing board and then going to sew your hem. Instead, you do everything at the sewing machine. And here on the inside of the skirt, you can see that the excess fabric was eased in, but you do not have any folds visible on the outside of your circle skirt. And that's it. Your Audrey dress should be done by now, and I hope you enjoyed making your Audrey dress, and I would love to see your version. If you've made your Audrey dress, please tag me on Instagram so I get the chance to see your versions. I'm really excited about that. And see you in the next video. Bye.